Starting with the man that built the Detroit Red Wings. Have you heard about this? Have you heard about Ken Holland and how he was the GM of the Detroit Red Wings? Have you ever heard him talk about this?
I
He's
haven't.
mentioned
I
it a few
haven't, Jay
times.
Leno. I have not, Jay Leno.
Have you heard about
What
this?
are you
Have you
talking
heard about
about?
this?
Yeah.
He, because I think I don't even know how many episodes ago this was, but I remember talking about how Ken Holland sounded really smart in his postseason availability with media when he was basically talking about the Oilers getting swept and basically talking about like the pain and all that you have to go through like before you finally build a contender. And I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like, I get it. Like, he's not willing to jump the gun and do anything brash. But then he traded a
And then what
player
happened?
and a conditional pick for a player with absolutely zero value who wanted out of the Chicago Blackhawks, carries a $5.5 million cap hit for the next 2 seasons, is 37 years old, and is completely washed. And in his media availability when discussing why he made this trade for Duncan Keith, Ken Holland said, or he equated it, to acquiring Chris Chelios. Yeah.
What?
Duncan Keith is not Chris Chelios when he was acquired
Anymore.
by the Red Wings anymore.
He might have
Maybe
been
like
close
3
to
years ago.
He might have been
maybe?
close to. I mean, he is like Chris Chelios in the fact that he's a defenseman from Chicago that Ken Holland has picked up. That might be fair. But he is not Chris Chelios in practice, in execution.
Yes.
I think I know the tweet you're getting that from. I think that, or like there was like a tweet that somebody discussed about that whole thing where that specific reference.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that they brought up was that Chris Chelios, the season before Ken Holland had picked him up and brought him to Detroit, had gotten Norris votes, he'd been in the contention for top defenseman. Duncan Keith, whereas Duncan Keith has not gotten a single Norris vote, I believe, within the past 4 or 5 years. So
I think, he got one in like 2016, 17 or something, maybe.
Yeah.
That's probably it.
It's been a while, at the very least. We might not have the exact numbers, but it has been a while. And the Oilers have picked him up, as well as Tim Soderlund, a prospect, an AHL prospect, forward, in exchange for defenseman Caleb Jones, and a 2022 conditional third-round pick, the condition being if the Oilers make it to the 2022 Stanley Cup Final, and Keith is top 4 in playoffs time on ice during the first 3 rounds, the pick upgrades to a 2022 second round, which really means that it's a third. So it's a third rounder. Pick. So it is so it's a third rounder because they're not getting anywhere close to that. I think you and I, as soon as those rumors had started up, because the whole thing is with Duncan Keith was that he wanted to move closer to home. He's a BC kid, so he wanted to move closer to home. I believe to be closer to his family. I think his wife and kid live in BC still, like full time. So he wanted to be closer to them. And so it was really going to basically narrow down more or less any trade involving Duncan Keith was going to narrow down to one of Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, or Seattle. Yeah. Obviously, Seattle wasn't going to take him. There was no there unless they were.
They have a very large analytics department. They weren't going to take him.
They have a very large analytics department. They don't, and as far as we can tell, they're not going to have any issues getting to the cap floor. So when it comes to the expansion draft and everything, so they don't really need to say bring on a guy with a big cap hit just to kind of hit the floor. Like say if you remember the Vegas expansion draft, you'll remember they took guys in the expansion draft like David Clarkson and Mikhail Grabovski just so they could get up to the amount of cap space they needed to. Even though those weren't necessarily the best players available, they just needed those players to fill room.
Right.
The Kraken aren't expected to have that issue this time around because of the flat cap and everything else. So they're going to get a lot of good players who, with decent value, for nothing so they don't have to worry about that. So they're out of the picture.
Yeah.
As much as acquiring Duncan Keith for too much very much sounds like a Canucks thing to do.
Yes.
They don't have the cap space to do it, thankfully. So there was really no go. That was never going to be a thing. The Canucks just weren't going to make that happen under any way, shape, or form. And that's frankly good. They dodged a bullet.
Yeah.
Their bad cap situation helped them today, which is good for them.
It's like when death by 1,000 cuts, like you run out of blood to lose. Yeah. Like so another cut doesn't really actually do anything.
Yeah, but on the flip, it's like on the flip side, I'm all good. Like, and then Calgary doesn't really need him. I'm sure they could have picked him up if they wanted, but I don't know what the cap situation is like. But they didn't. They don't really need him. Their defense. I think they would have. Their defense is their stronger suit right now. Is their stronger department right now. More or less.
They would have only picked him up basically to expose him, so they could protect Giordano or something. But even then, I don't think they could.
Mark Giordano is kind of a better version of Duncan Keith. Now, older guy. Puts up a decent number of points, is more known for his offensive contributions. There is a good reason. They already have kind of their version there.
Yeah.
And again, arguably a better version of him. Yeah. So the Oilers were going to be the only team that were going to really be involved in this. And yet they acted like, God, oh my God, we need to wow Chicago with a great offer because they'll never let him go otherwise. I don't know how you managed to lose this one, but you really did. Well done. The Hawks absolutely fleeced them.
Imagine losing a Duncan Keith trade in 2021. That is hard to do.
It's impressive. It takes an effort. It took a real effort. They gave it 110%.
Maybe we haven't mentioned this, but Chicago didn't retain salary in the transaction, just so everyone is aware.
That's so it isn't like thing right there.
It isn't like they retained half of the $5.5 million that is on the his cap hit for the next 2 years. It's the full thing.
It's the full 5.5.
It's the Oilers who don't have cap space.
Yep.
They have $11.5 million or something now to figure out the rest of their lineup, which is nothing.
You and I talked a few weeks ago when they gave Ryan Nugent-Hopkins that big extension about how, if they're not going out and if they're going to use this money to bring in some cheap, good depth pieces and whatnot and help help build a better supporting cast around Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, we can kind of stomach that amount of money given to Nuge because he's still a good contributor, even if he doesn't score as much as maybe you'd like. He still contributes quite regularly. The Oilers need as much of that as they can get, what have you. And they have the cap room to do it. It can work out fine. Now they have significantly less with a lot of players and a lot of things still to figure out. They still don't have goaltending. There's already I already saw a tweet yesterday that apparently Mike Smith might try and push for more money from the Oilers.
It's for real? That's awesome.
I think I saw something like that. I think I saw something along those lines. I mean, good for him. Go get your money, dude. If they're going to pay you, go ahead. They still need a better defense because clearly Duncan Keith is not going to help you in your own end of the ice really anyway, even if he was playing too close to his full potential. And you have basically no bottom six. You don't have good depth. You still have James Neal making $5.7 million for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? There is nothing there. And there's no way anyone is going to help you on any of those contracts.
No.
This isn't like Chicago where people will somehow bend over backwards to help you out of any situation you have.
Literally any situation that they have.
Literally. And there's obviously there's a much darker version of that going on right now off the ice. But I don't know what Edmonton's thinking here. I get that. Okay, I guess we should start by being at least somewhat nice about Duncan Keith. Like, at least somewhat nice here. As much as we don't like him in Vancouver, that was the other thing about why the Canucks were never going to take him, is because the Canucks, famously, Duncan Keith is not well liked in Vancouver. He probably, I don't think anybody would have liked him here. I think he would have been the only player to get booed if he came in the starting lineup by his own fans. If he came in the starting lineup for the Canucks, like if they announced him, people would boo him.
Oh yeah, for
sure. But nonetheless, he has won a Norris Trophy. He does have a Norris Trophy on his resume. That's more than a lot of defensemen can say. He has 3 Stanley Cups on his resume. That's more than most people in the NHL can say. He probably, I would imagine, as far as current active NHLers go, he's probably won the most, has he not? Like him, Kane, Taves, anyone in that core Blackhawks group? I don't think. Well, Patrick Maroon. Sorry, I forgot about elite forward Patrick Maroon. Yes. He's also won 3 Stanley Cups. How could you forget? That's right. He just won. He just won 3rd year in a row because he's incredible.
Because he's that good.
He's that good. So yeah, he does have winning experience, but as many people pointed out,
from years ago,
he is turning 38. He's turning 38 in a few days. So he's nearing 40, and he is very clearly, no matter how elite a defenseman he was in his prime, he's very clearly not that anymore. So the only real reason, and this is the reason that Ken Holland seemed to be banking on in his press conference, is a word we love here in Vancouver, which is the intangibles.
Yes.
Which is the fact that he brings veteran leadership and experience winning a championship. Which, I mean, yeah, sure, but then you could just get him to coach. Why not just put him as a coach? You could have done that instead. Like, I saw somebody suggest the idea that maybe they could do pull a Marian Hossa with him and say he's, claim he's allergic to something in his equipment. Wait until the playoffs and then bring him in for no cap space because he's on LTIR the whole time, which, again, sure, but put him on the bench. Just put him on the bench or something. Why did you trade for him?
Well, Oilers gonna Oiler. I don't know. It's pretty funny. Like that's the bottom line. Is if you're a Canucks fan, you're just like you're loving all of this because it's everything you would hope for. Like because obviously the fatalist and everyone is like, oh god, Keith's on the market, and the team has said like they want more grit, more heft, and more whatnot in their defense and in their forward group. And then Duncan Keith is suddenly made available, and it's like, oh well, that could be a fit for, like, you could just picture the wheels turning, like, oh well, I remember Duncan Keith was a powerhouse 4 years ago, and if he's available, we should get him, because NHL GMs get their eyes locked on a player, they don't get him, they forget about it. Couple years go by, that player is suddenly available. They don't realize how terrible they are now, and yet they still want them because they remember the good old days. And I respect the nostalgia. I'm a nostalgic guy. I'm constantly, rifling through my past and thinking of the good times, the GTZs. But I'm not in charge of $1 billion organization with my nostalgia. These guys are.
The CreaseCast is pretty close. Like we're almost there.
Our Patreon is outrageous lately.
Yes, we are.
Thanks, Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, join our patreon.com/CreaseCast. Yeah, subtle ad. And I mean, in some cases, you can have your cake and eat it too. Like there are some rare cases where you can bring in a guy for veteran presence and for the nostalgia of, yes, they've won in the past, but they might also come in and contribute and actually be a positive on the ice for you. Like, one of the best signings, I remember like this back in the Mike Gillis era for the Canucks. And it's one that kind of gets made fun of a little bit in nowadays, but in looking back on it now as well, one of the best signings that Mike Gillis ever made was the Matt Sundin signing. Not because of the fact that he came in and magically, won a Selke or something and just became this incredible talent. he came in and scored goals. He came in and contributed regularly offensively. He was great in the playoffs that year. I'll never forget how good he was in the postseason. But the other two things that made the Sundin signing important was that it showed that Vancouver could be a destination for top tier talent and specifically top tier UFAs, because frankly, Vancouver has a hard time getting that done,
right?
Even to this day. But I remember back in that part of the Gillis era, it was very easy. Suddenly they were getting the top fish on the market if they wanted. But number two, he also really helped nurture a lot of the younger Canucks and like the younger parts of the core. Like I believe Ryan Kessler's talked about in the past, like how important Matt Sundin was for him specifically. The Sedins always talk about it. I think Luongo's talked about it before. Like lots of those core guys who went on to lead the team in 2011 talked about what an important part of their future success was due to Matt Sundin coming in and kind of giving them like a leg up and kind of and teaching them a few things about the league and how in hockey that they maybe didn't already have, that they just didn't have as a veteran leader. But he also got results on the ice, and that's the important part. So I'm all for bringing in older veterans if they're here to contribute and help. But you can, again, if you want that, you don't have to go out and spend a premium on 38-year-old Duncan Keith, who clearly cannot play the same way he has anymore. And I guess Ken Holland mentioned as well that like a lot of the players on the team talked about Duncan Keith as a guy that was hard to defend against and that was hard to play against and whatnot. And that's also part of the reason why. I mean, you can't listen to your players, dude. Like your players like guys as well. Like they're like I believe lots of NHLers relatively recently said Carey Price is still the best goalie in the NHL, like in a player poll. Like he's very good. He's still very good, but there are clearly goalies who have passed him on that list. But everybody loves Carey Price because he's Carey Price.
They're legacy things, right?
It's rose-colored glasses. It's the rose-colored glasses. You can't see the red flags.
Yeah, I think Holland even said, like, I asked my core group, and they said, like, oh, they remembered how difficult it was playing against Keith in the playoffs in the bubble. It's like in the bubble, like
2 years ago.
Yeah, you guys got killed, and you looked like none of you guys wanted to be there. That wasn't necessarily Duncan Keith putting on a masterclass performance. That was mostly the Blackhawks just like showing up and the entire Oilers crew just like taking a walk and getting ready for golf season. Like they just weren't even in it. So, I mean,
yeah,
I don't know. It's quite the lapse in logic to just be like, oh, my players said that it was tough to play against this one guy once. So that justifies a $5.5 million expenditure on a player that is going to contribute just as much as the guy that we sent away for him in Caleb Jones. Like that's a big.
Caleb Jones is younger, is controllable contract wise because he's an RFA. He only was making $850K. Like whether or not, like some people have even said that Caleb Jones. I'm not like I've seen some people talk about how they're not as high on Caleb Jones as other people are, and like how he's okay. But he's okay as far, and maybe people are overhyping like his potential sort of thing. But even then, like he's younger, he's got more. Your chances of him turning into something better are far higher than your chances of Duncan Keith being better than he has been the last so many years as he's been on the decline.
Yeah.
Like I'll ask you this. Do you think that let's say we're looking at the exact same trade here, only difference being that Ken Holland gets the Hawks to retain 50% of his salary. So it's down to 225.
2.25, yeah.
Yeah, it's down to about a 225. Does that make it more stomachable for you? Would that have made it more stomachable?
I mean, I wouldn't personally.
Like
because like I've watched Keith play enough where I'm like the dude is completely washed. And like it's the same thing, like the logic that's going to apply to when the Canucks eventually re-sign Alex Edler, because Alex Edler is going to be commanding, I want $4 million. I'm going to take a discount because I only want to play in Vancouver, but I'm not going to take that much kind of discount. But you know what Alex Edler is? He's washed. He's too old to be playing the kind of top pairing matchups that the Canucks would like him to play. the Oilers are in the same boat where I think they believe they're getting a Duncan Keith that can play top pairing minutes no matter what, which isn't really worth $5.5 million when you watch him play, let alone at half of the salary retained at 2.25, because you can get, like you said, you have one in the system. You had Caleb Jones, who on his next deal at 1.2 million or whatever it is, he might overplay that and give you a $5.5 million worthy defenseman on a $1 million contract. But again, it's kind of the old hockey club ways of overvaluing experience and veteran leadership. Not that those things aren't valuable to a locker room, but there's also got to be a point where you're like, okay, we have enough veterans on our team as is. We have a 55-year-old starting goaltender. We have, Adam Larson, who's been around the league for ages. We've got McDavid isn't like a spring chicken either. Like, he's the leader of the team and has been in the league since 2015, 16.
Are you calling me old? Because we're the same age. How dare you?
I'm not saying you're old. You're not there yet. But
I'm just no longer in my prime. How dare you?
Yeah. But and I'm just saying, like, NHL GMs, like, they have this like vision in their mind of like some 36-year-old veteran who puts up 90 points like they used to back in the 80s and 90s, and those just don't exist anymore if they're not named Alex Ovechkin.
And even then, like, when has that worked? Like, what team in the salary cap era has gone out of their way to pick up specifically one guy with a past cup pedigree to come in and revitalize your locker room and have it work and have it magically work and turn into a cup champion? I don't think any team has. I don't think any team has had that happen to them. Like, some teams have brought in older veterans, but not because they're necessarily.
But no one has explicitly been like, oh, we acquired Pat Maroon from the Blues because of his veteran leadership. It's like, no, we acquired him because he's going to be a good fit on our fourth line.
Right, and he came at a relatively cheaper cost. He came at a relatively cheaper cost. He did that purposely because he knew he was going to probably go and try and win a championship. There's a lot, and he contributed in the role that they put him in. He was fit well for that role. Yeah. Like, the closest thing I can think of is like Ron Hainsey in Pittsburgh, and even then, that was on a team that had already won a cup in 2009. They already had those guys. Like, maybe you have to go back to that 2009 team when they get like Bill Guerin, who we'll talk about later in the show, for his non on ice decisions. But like, that's the closest thing I can think of, because it doesn't happen really. It doesn't really happen.
You're acquiring players with Stanley Cup pedigree because they're actually still good players. You're not acquiring them because they have 800 games under their belt and have been in a locker room before. Because guess what? Most of these players have been in a locker room their entire lives. Yeah. They're used to this kind of shit. You don't need to overpay for this or somehow make that the defining factor for why you would acquire someone. Yeah. Jim Benning, please stop doing that.
Yeah. Literally, and you already talked about it, the fact that just like literally the Canucks right now, like we've already said the Pacific Division is going to be real weak this year. The Oilers just actively made themselves weaker.
Yeah, that rocks. I mean, we were saying it together. Like, it's pretty great that the Canucks have done the Paul Rudd and forgetting Sarah Marshall approach of stop doing anything. You're doing too much. Do less and just pop up. So they're about to pop up through the virtue of doing nothing, because everyone around them in their division is deciding to do very dumb things. Like who's gonna just eat the Oilers alive? And now that their back end is Duncan Keith, and like, who's this right pairing defenseman that's gonna have to make up for him? It can only be like Nurse, and Nurse is like not really. I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, he's a Norris caliber defenseman.
You have Ethan Bear, who's quite good. Like, Ethan Bear is your best bet. Sure. And already it sounds like, apparently, like, I believe in that same press conference he talked about the fact that Holland talked about that Oscar Klefbom, who would have been that guy, is still injured. I don't even know what's happened to Klefbom. Like, I loved Oscar Klefbom when he was there. Like, I really wanted the Canucks to try and go and make a deal to try and bring him to Vancouver when he was at his best. But like now it's just like he might not even play. Like who knows if we'll ever see him in the NHL again because of his injury issues. Is there any single possible way that the Oilers come out on top in this scenario? Like, is there any foreseeable way that this trade ends up making them better for it? Not necessarily because Duncan Keith plays fantastic or something, but like, is there anything that like we're not seeing here that potentially could make the Oilers better in the long run for having made this trade?
Long run? No. Short term, maybe it just depends, right? They obviously value Duncan Keith very highly, right? If they were thinking like, okay, there's no way Clefbaum's coming back, so we need some kind of stable defenseman like on the back end, then sure, I guess I can understand it, where they're just like, we lost a huge contributor. We need some guy that's proven to be able to do it before. Maybe they think Philip Broberg or Evan Bouchard are going to be like top 4 defensemen next year, and Duncan Keith can just be like a third pairing minute muncher. But like I said, you don't spend $5.5 million on that. Like you can't be. Like the same reason that the Canucks can't be spending $6 million on Tyler Myers to chip in just as much offense as Troy Stecher on the Canucks. Like that's not efficient money spending.
To make more money than Jeff Petrie and have Jeff Petrie double him in points. Like
exactly.
So,
short term, maybe there's something they see that we don't, but I don't see it at all.
The only thing I can see here is the expansion draft with the Kraken coming up. Maybe you were going to potentially lose Caleb Jones to the Kraken for nothing. I don't know if that's the direction they would have gone here. I don't know exactly who they're on the hook to protect. And right now I would say that as far as the Oilers are concerned, I would imagine that they are more likely to go in the 8 players, 1 goalie route, like just because of the fact that there aren't really a lot of forwards that necessarily warrant protecting here.
Right.
Like I don't think you have to protect. Like maybe you have to protect Kale. Do you have to protect Kaylor Yamamoto?
No, I don't think he's. Actually, his deal's up. He might be.
You might. I think you might have. So, like right now, it looked just from looking at their list very, very quickly. I could be completely incorrect here, but if you're going like the 8 players, 1 defenseman route, I mean, I guess Duncan Keith has to be protected unless he waives, because he's a no move. He's got a no move clause. Yeah, because
his no move clause did travel with him to the Oilers, I believe.
They honored that.
Yeah. So he'd have to waive it after arriving there, which would be. I mean, that would be.
I don't think Seattle.
Them.
I mean, I don't think Seattle would pick them up. I don't think Seattle would pick them up. So I think they'd be flying. But you look at the fact that, like, okay, outside of say Darnell Nurse, like you do have. Well, yeah, I'm just looking at the list. I guess maybe not in this case, just because of the fact of. It doesn't look like you would have to protect, say, like Evan Bouchard or anything like that. So, yeah, I guess generally, actually, it does look more like they'd go in the 7-4-3 defenseman. So it doesn't really do anything. Like it doesn't do anything for them. There's not really anyone that but they do have to protect Yamamoto. So, yeah, who knows? I don't know. I don't see anything here. I will now. Turning attention to kind of Chicago really briefly, I don't really like right now. This is as far as a trade is concerned, this is a clear good move for Chicago. They're clearly not going anywhere fast. They're developing
free up cap space.
Free up a good amount of cap space. They did right by a guy who won them championships, and they get a decent defenseman, defensive prospect, Caleb Jones, who can come into who already can play at the NHL level. So will probably be a good improvement for you. The one thing that's being talked about here, of course, if you're not well versed in your NHL family trees, is that Caleb Jones is brother is Seth Jones, who is a UFA or an RFA, pardon me, or something like that. Something like that. Who's already said he's not going to re-sign with the Blue Jackets, so they have to. So he will be testing. I think he is a UFA. He'll be testing UFA.
Yeah.
So now, here's the thing. A lot of people will tell you that Seth Jones is probably going to make a lot more money than he should. He is probably going to come at a premium cost for a defenseman who's good, like a good defenseman, but nowhere near as good, not an elite defenseman not the elite defenseman that he's perceived to be. Can Chicago potentially ruin this trade for themselves by trying to lure Seth Jones to Chicago to play with his brother and giving him that premium contract? Does that ruin it for them?
I mean, it would, because it's kind of like it would be a shame for, like, if I'm in Chicago's shoes, which I would hate to be because that organization is dog shit. If I had managed to free up $5.5 million of cap space, and like in my contention window right now, like it's clear as day, they need years probably before they're back to being a legitimate contender. Like they're just kind of like listless right now. They still need a bigger prospect pool. They have Kirby Dach, but I mean, that's like about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be a shame to suddenly free up probably the hardest contract on their books to get rid of besides Brent Seabrooks, and then be like, oh, we're going to spend that and more on a defenseman who might not even be a contributor to when we're back to contending. Like if I was like the capologist, I'd be like, what do we do? Why did we make that trade for Keith then? If we could wait a year till when he's an actual UFA, forget his actual personal wants, and try and trade him as a deadline deal, assuming he doesn't crater. Like we'd probably get just as much, if not more, at a trade deadline than, Caleb Jones, who's fine, and a pick, which is fine. But we probably could have got more if we just kind of ignored the player requests, and we wouldn't have spent because Seth Jones is going to get paid.
Seth Jones is going to get paid a lot of money.
He's going to get paid a lot of money.
Even with the flat cap, he'll probably get a lot. He'll probably get a pretty hefty paycheck from whoever he plays for next. And one of the GMs we always bring up for the way that they approach their decision making is Steve Yzerman. Like the fact that he traded Anthony Mantha specifically because he recognized the fact that when Anthony Mantha is in his prime now, more or less, or like something like that. He's close. He's around his prime. He's circling.
Yeah, it was his.
We are not there yet.
Convention window wasn't going to be in line with when he'd still be like at his most valuable peak or prime as a player. So why not sell as early as possible and get a great return for him, which they did. Yes. Even got a good player in return who probably is going to age out as well in Jacob Vrana. But then they can sell Vrana as well before his current deal is up and probably get even more out of that. That is recognizing opportunity cost very well, which is something that both the Oilers and depending on what the Chicago Blackhawks do off of this don't quite understand. Because if they just take that $5.5 million of cap savings and all of a sudden go, let's go spend it, then you've undone all the work you just did. A lot of hard work, because how many years, have we heard, what are the Blackhawks going to do with Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook? They're clearly falling off. Their contracts are so impossible to move. No one's ever going to want them. Well,
they got lucky and they got lucky multiple times. Like people forget the fact that they got lucky back in I want to say right after they won the cup. They got when they won their last cup, that the Coyotes were in desperate need of just getting to the cap floor because they were tanking, and so they were able to take on Marion Hossa or Nicholas LTIR. Hossa's LTIR. They were able to pick up Nicholas Jalmerson, like a bunch of Hawk players that would have caused headaches for them down the road when it came to their cap situation and everything else. and everything else like surrounding it, had they not gone there. And Chicago has, and then there are a couple of cases where Chicago has completely missed I don't want to say they've completely missed and like say traded guys like Artemi Panarin for Brandon Saad.
Mm-hmm.
They made some clear errors there. Yeah, they've gotten pretty lucky a couple times here and there. This is one of them, probably to a certain extent here.